In Fátima, 3 little shepherds were chosen by heaven: Lucia dos Santos and her cousins, the siblings Francisco and Jacinta Marto. While Lucia would live to spread the message, Francisco and Jacinta, called to heaven as children, achieved an extraordinary holiness. What did these little siblings experience that led them to such total dedication? Chapter 1. The Children Chosen by Heaven. In the small village of Aljustrel, a hamlet belonging to Fátima, life passed with the simplicity typical of rural Portugal in the early 20th century. In this humble setting, Francisco and Jacinta Marto were raised under the loving care of their parents, Manuel Pedro Marto and Olimpia de Jesus dos Santos. Francisco, born on June 11, 1908, and Jacinta, who came into the world on March 11, 1910, spent their days together with their cousin Lucia dos Santos, who would become their inseparable companion. The daily routine of the little ones was marked by tending the family's sheep, a task they performed with joy and responsibility. Francisco, known for his contemplative and calm character, usually wore his traditional cap, carapuça, and a short vest, while Jacinta, the youngest and liveliest, brightened the fields with her innocent smile and inexhaustible energy. The 3 formed an inseparable trio, united not only by blood, but by a deep friendship and mutual trust. They spent their days playing and reciting simple prayers learned from their parents and the strong Catholic tradition that pervaded life in Fátima. Their natural innocence and purity made them the perfect vessels for the extraordinary events that were to come. The Marto family environment was steeped in a simple yet deep faith. Manuel Pedro Marto, the father, was known for his honesty and natural wisdom, while Olimpia taught her children Christian virtues with patient dedication. This formation in faith, though simple, prepared the ground for the heavenly mission that would be entrusted to them. In the spring of 1916, when Francisco was 8 and Jacinta 6, they began to experience the first signs that their ordinary lives were about to be transformed into something extraordinary. What no one could have imagined was that these little shepherds, who barely knew how to read or write, were being prepared to become messengers of one of the most important Marian messages in the history of the Church. Chapter 2. Childhood. In Aljustrel life. In Aljustrel flowed with the simplicity characteristic of the Portuguese rural life. The Marto siblings woke each morning to the crowing of roosters and the sound of the bells from Fátima's parish church. Francisco, always protective, looked after his little sister Jacinta with a love that went beyond mere sibling duty. Their personalities, though different, complemented each other perfectly. Francisco was a quiet and contemplative child who found joy in music and moments of silence. With his flute, a gift from a local shepherd, he would enliven the afternoons while watching over the flock. His reflective nature even showed in his play, as he often preferred to observe his friends rather than actively participate in childish mischief. Jacinta, on the other hand, overflowed with energy and affection. Her tender heart shone especially in the care of the lambs. She loved dancing and singing, and her crystalline laughter was known throughout the village. Her special devotion to traditional games and dances made her the life of family gatherings. The relationship with their cousin Lucia dos Santos added a special dimension to their childhood. Lucia, 3 years older than Francisco, became the natural leader of the small group. Together, the 3 cousins spent long hours in the fields of Cova da Iria, tending the sheep and sharing stories and prayers that Lucia taught them. Their days passed between shepherding, playing, and their first lessons in catechism. Formal education was not a priority at that time and place, but the children learned the fundamental truths of the Catholic faith in a living way, through family traditions and the community's religious celebrations. Chapter 3. The First Encounter with the Angel. The spring of 1916 marked the beginning of a series of extraordinary events in the lives of the 3 shepherds. While tending the flock at Loca do Cabeço, a small hill near Aljustrel, they experienced their first supernatural visit, the Angel of Portugal, also known as the Angel of Peace. The day had begun like any other, with the children taking the sheep out to graze. After sharing their humble lunch and praying the rosary as usual, a gentle breeze began to stir the olive trees. Suddenly, above the trees appeared a light, brighter than crystal, which gradually took shape until it became a young man of extraordinary beauty, transparent like crystal, intersected by sunlight. The angel introduced himself, saying, "Do not be afraid. I am the angel of peace. Pray with me." Kneeling on the ground, he bowed his head and taught them this prayer. "My God, I believe, adore, hope, and love you. I beg pardon for those who do not believe, do not adore, do not hope, and do not love you." This first appearance left the children in such a deep state of supernatural absorption that they spent a long time repeating the prayer. The impact of this encounter was different for each child. Francisco could only see the angel without hearing his words, while Jacinta and Lucia could both see and hear him. This particularity would also mark the future appearances of Our Lady and define the unique role of each of the visionaries in the events to follow. After this first encounter, the children experienced a profound change in their spirituality. Their play began to mix with moments of intense prayer, and the presence of the supernatural in their lives filled them with a spiritual maturity that amazed all who knew them. Chapter 4. The Lady Brighter Than the Sun. May 13, 1917 began like any other day in Fátima. Francisco, Jacinta and Lucia took their sheep to graze in the Cova da Iria, unaware that that day would change not only their lives, but the history of the Catholic faith. While playing after the rosary, a brilliant flash in the clear sky caught their attention. Above a small holm oak then appeared a lady brighter than the sun, dressed entirely in white, with a mantle edged in gold that covered her from head to toe. Her face, indescribably beautiful, radiated an intense light that almost blinded. In a soft, melodious voice, she reassured the children, "Do not be afraid. I will not harm you." Urdine, as with the angel, Francisco could see the lady but not hear her, while Jacinta saw and heard, and Lucia was the only one who engaged in conversation with the apparition. The lady asked them to return to the Cova da Iria on the 13th of each month for 6 consecutive months. She asked if they were willing to offer themselves to God so that they might bear all the sufferings he wished to send as an act of reparation for sins and for the conversion of sinners. The 3 children responded with a determined yes to this heavenly request. This childlike but profound yes would mark the beginning of a series of sacrifices and sufferings that the little shepherds would embrace with an astonishing spiritual maturity. The lady asked them to pray the rosary every day to achieve peace in the world and an end to the war. When they returned home, the children agreed to keep this extraordinary experience a secret. However, little Jacinta, in her innocent enthusiasm, could not contain her joy and shared what had happened with her family. Soon, the news spread throughout the village, triggering a series of events that would test the faith and strength of the young visionaries. Chapter 5. The Secrets of Heaven. During the apparition of July 13, 1917, Our Lady entrusted the little shepherds with 3 secrets that would deeply mark their lives, especially Jacinta's. The first was a terrifying vision of hell that affected the little shepherd particularly, awakening in her a burning zeal for the salvation of souls. The second secret included a devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary and warnings about a future world war if humanity did not convert. Jacinta, with her sensitive and compassionate heart, was deeply impressed by these revelations. Often she was found sitting on a stone, thoughtful, and when asked what she was thinking about, she replied, "About the war that is coming, with so many people dying." The third secret, which remained hidden until the year 2000, contained a prophetic vision that included the persecution of the Church and the suffering of the Holy Father. This vision had a particular impact on Jacinta, who developed a special devotion for the Pope, whom she saw in her visions crying and praying in a large house while people threw stones at him. The children faithfully kept these secrets despite pressures and threats from civil and religious authorities. Francisco, although unable to hear the lady's words, understood the gravity of the messages through his sisters' and cousins' explanations, and he responded with a profound life of contemplative prayer. The impact of these secrets manifested differently in each of the visionaries. While Francisco focused on consoling Jesus, Jacinta became consumed with the desire to make sacrifices for sinners, and Lucia assumed the responsibility of spreading devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Chapter 6. Francisco, the Contemplative. Francisco Marto developed a unique spirituality among the three visionaries. His inability to hear Our Lady's words led him to a path of deep contemplation. "You don't hear Our Lady, do you, Francisco?" his sister would ask. "No," he replied. "I see her speaking with you, but I don't know what she says." This limitation, far from being an obstacle, became a special gift. Francisco spent long hours in silence, contemplating the mystery of God. His greatest concern was to console Jesus, whom he had seen very sad because of sins. For this, he often retreated to solitary places to pray or spent long periods in front of the Blessed Sacrament in the parish church. His love for the Eucharist was extraordinary. Even without having received his first communion, Francisco frequently visited what he called hidden Jesus, referring to the Blessed Sacrament. "What do you like more?" people would ask him, "receiving Jesus in communion or being with him in the tabernacle?" "I like being with him more," he replied, "because then I don't have to watch him leave." Francisco's spiritual transformation was remarkable. The boy who once enjoyed playing and listening to music on his flute now found his greatest joy in silent prayer. His mother noticed how he would get up early to go to church, even before taking the sheep out to pasture, and how he would even refuse water on the hottest days, offering this sacrifice for the sinners. Despite his deep inner life, Francisco always maintained his characteristic gentleness and simplicity. He never complained about the mockery or persecutions he faced, and when his companions teased him, he would respond with a serene smile. His only desire was to console Jesus and make others love him, as he often repeated. Chapter 7. Jacinta, the Messenger of the Immaculate Heart. Jacinta, the youngest of the visionaries, experienced an extraordinary transformation after the apparitions. The vision of hell and Our Lady's words about the salvation of souls awakened in her an apostolic zeal far beyond her years. Her tender heart burned with love for the Immaculate Heart of Mary and compassion for sinners. The little shepherd developed a special sensitivity to the suffering of others. Often she was found in tears, and when asked why, she replied, "Our Lady showed us so many people in suffering. If you could see, it breaks my heart, and I want to suffer for their conversion, to repair the Immaculate Heart of Mary." This compassion led her to make ever greater sacrifices. The particular visions Jacinta received concerning the Holy Father deepened her love for the Church and the Pope. "Do you see the Holy Father?" she sometimes asked Lucia. "I see him in a very large house, kneeling by a table, his face in his hands, crying. Poor Holy Father, we must pray for him." This devotion to the Pope would become one of the most notable features of her spirituality. Despite her young age, Jacinta deeply understood Fátima's message about reparation and conversion. She practiced mortifications with surprising maturity. She would forgo her snack to give to the poor, wore a rough rope tied around her waist, and offered her thirst as a sacrifice for sinners. When her mother asked why she wouldn't drink water on hot days, she simply replied, "Our Lady asked us to make sacrifices for the sinners." Jacinta's love for Our Lady was evident in every aspect of her life. She frequently repeated, "How my heart aches for Our Lady, how much I love her." This love drove her to teach other children to pray the rosary and speak of God's love. Even during her final illness, she did not cease to offer her sufferings for the conversion of sinners and in reparation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Chapter 8. The Sacrifices for Sinners. The little visionaries, especially Francisco and Jacinta, embraced a life of sacrifice with a maturity astonishing for their age. Inspired by the words of the Angel of Peace and Our Lady, they understood the importance of making reparation for sins and converting sinners. Their sacrifices began with small renunciations. They gave up their snacks to the poor, drank water from dirty puddles to mortify themselves, and tied rough ropes around their waists. The persecution and mockery they suffered became one of their greatest offerings. When the authorities briefly imprisoned them in Urem, trying to force them to reveal the secrets, the children transformed that suffering into prayer. Francisco consoled his sister by saying, "If they do not kill us, soon we will be with Our Lady. It doesn't matter, we can offer everything for the conversion of sinners." The mortifications of the little shepherds worried their family, especially their mother Olympia. She often found them kneeling on the floor of their room, repeating the prayer the angel had taught them. When she asked why they were not eating, Jacinta would simply reply, "Our Lady asked us to make sacrifices for the sinners." In his silent contemplation, Francisco especially offered his sacrifices to console Jesus. Despite the intense heat of the Portuguese summer, he refused to drink water, saying, "The thirstier I get, the more I offer it to Jesus for the sinners." His sister Jacinta, for her part, even refrained from singing and dancing, activities she loved before the apparitions. The sacrifices of the little shepherds were not mere external mortifications, but arose from a deep love for God and for souls. As Jacinta explained, "I love suffering so much for the sake of our Lord and Our Lady, to please them. They love very much those who suffer for the conversion of sinners." Chapter 9. The Miracle of the Sun. October 13th, 1917, dawned with a torrential downpour in Fátima. Despite the bad weather, a crowd of more than 70,000 people gathered at the Cova da Iria, responding to Our Lady's promise to perform a miracle so that all may believe. Little Francisco and Jacinta, along with their cousin Lucia, arrived at the site with their parents, soaked by the rain but filled with confidence. Amid the general expectation, Our Lady appeared for the last time over the holm oak. While Jacinta and Lucia beheld the lady, Francisco, as usual, could only see her without hearing her words. The Virgin presented herself as Our Lady of the Rosary and requested that a chapel be built in her honor. Then, opening her hands, she directed rays toward the sun. What happened next was recorded in history as the miracle of the sun. The sun began to dance in the sky, spinning on its axis like a wheel of fire and projecting beams of light in various colors. The amazed crowd watched as the sun seemed to detach from the firmament and descend toward the earth, only to return to its place moments later. At that moment, the rain ceased and the soaked clothes of everyone present dried instantly. During the miracle, the three children witnessed other visions. They saw the Holy Family, Our Lady of Sorrows, and Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Francisco, in his characteristic simplicity, remained absorbed in contemplation, while Jacinta, with tears in her eyes, could not stop gazing at the celestial wonder. The miracle of the sun was the public confirmation of the authenticity of the Fátima apparitions. For Francisco and Jacinta, however, such confirmation was unnecessary. Their simple, pure faith had allowed them to believe from the beginning, and now they saw Our Lady's promise fulfilled. This event marked the end of the public apparitions, but not the end of their special mission. Chapter 10. The epidemic that carried them to heaven. In October 1918, just over a year after the miracle of the sun, the terrible Spanish flu epidemic that ravaged Europe reached Aljustrel. Francisco and Jacinta fell ill almost simultaneously, thus fulfilling Our Lady's prediction that she would soon call them to heaven. The disease, which had claimed thousands of lives across Portugal, found in the little shepherds two souls prepared for the definitive encounter with God. Francisco, with his usual serenity, accepted the illness as a new opportunity to console Jesus. During his sickness, he received several visits from Our Lady, who confirmed that she would soon take him to heaven. The little visionary expressed his joy, saying, "How happy I am! Soon I will go to heaven. When I am there, I will console our Lord and Our Lady." His only concern was to receive his first communion before he died. Francisco's illness progressed rapidly. Despite the intense pain, he never complained, offering everything for the conversion of sinners. On April 2, 1919, aware that his end was near, he asked for confession and his first communion. The following day, with extraordinary lucidity and piety, he received the sacrament for the first and last time. He died at dawn on April 4th, with a serene smile on his face, thus fulfilling Our Lady's promise. Jacinta, on the other hand, suffered a more prolonged ordeal. Her illness was complicated by a purulent pleurisy that required her transfer to several hospitals. Separated from her family and her dear cousin Lucia, the little shepherd offered this additional suffering for the conversion of sinners. During her illness, she received several visits from Our Lady, who comforted her and announced further sufferings she would have to endure for the salvation of souls. Finally, Jacinta was taken to Hospital Dona Estefania in Lisbon, where she died alone, as Our Lady had foretold, on February 20th, 1920. Her last words were, "O my Jesus, now you can convert many sinners because this sacrifice is very great." Thus the little shepherd, who had so loved Our Lady and sinners, was reunited with her brother Francisco in heaven. Chapter 11. Jacinta's Private Visions. During the final months of her life, Jacinta received special visions that went beyond the shared apparitions with Francisco and Lucia. These private revelations demonstrated an extraordinary prophetic gift in such a young child and revealed her unique connection with heaven. On one occasion, while sitting by the well at Lucia's family home, Jacinta had a vision of the Holy Father that deeply marked her. She saw the Pope in a large house kneeling with his face in his hands, crying. Outside the house, a hostile crowd threw stones and hurled insults at him. This vision awakened in her a special devotion for the Pope that would accompany her until her death. The little visionary also received premonitions about World War II. With tears in her eyes, she described scenes of devastation. "I see so many roads filled with people fleeing, so many houses destroyed, and so many priests dying. How heartbroken I am by the war." Her visions led her to intensify her prayers and sacrifices for peace. During her illness, Our Lady continued to visit her, preparing her for her departure. She revealed with precision the details of her death, that she would die alone in a Lisbon hospital far from her family. Despite the painful nature of this revelation, Jacinta accepted it with serenity, seeing it as a final opportunity to offer her sacrifices for sinners. These private visions of Jacinta demonstrate an extraordinary spiritual maturity and a unique prophetic mission, distinct from that of her brother Francisco and cousin Lucia. Her private revelations complement the main message of Fátima and reveal a personal dimension of her sanctity that distinguishes her as an early mystic. Chapter 12. The Legacy of the Little Shepherds. The deaths of Francisco and Jacinta did not mark the end of their mission, but the beginning of a new phase in the history of Fátima. Their lives, though brief, left an extraordinary spiritual legacy that continues to inspire millions of people around the world. Their message of prayer, penance, and reparation for sinners remains as relevant today as it was in 1917. The tomb of the little shepherds in Fátima's cemetery soon became a place of pilgrimage. The faithful came to pray before their graves, attributing to them numerous graces and favors. Their cousin Lucia, who entered religious life, became the main transmitter of their testimony, writing her memoirs that would reveal to the world the profound spirituality of these extraordinary children. The example of Francisco and Jacinta challenges the common notion that children are too young to understand deep spiritual realities. Their mature and generous response to Our Lady's messages shows that holiness knows no age. As Pope John Paul II later said, they were two candles that God lit to illuminate humanity in its darkest and most troubled hours. The unique spirituality of each sibling continues to offer different yet complementary models of sanctity. Francisco, with his contemplative vocation and his desire to console Jesus, reminds us of the importance of silent prayer and adoration. Jacinta, with her apostolic zeal and love for sinners, teaches us the value of sacrifice for the salvation of souls. The Fátima message, lived so authentically by the little shepherds, acquired a new dimension with their deaths. It was no longer only a call to conversion and reparation, but also a living testimony of how God's grace can transform the simplest souls into extraordinary instruments of His love. Their short but intense lives demonstrate that holiness is possible at any age and in any circumstance. Chapter 13. The Path to Holiness. The process for the canonization of Francisco and Jacinta Marto officially began on April 30, 1952, when the Bishop of Leiria, Dom José Alves Correa da Silva, initiated the diocesan processes regarding the fame for holiness and virtues of the two siblings. It was the first time in the history of the Church that the canonization of non-martyr children was considered, making the process especially significant. The diocesan phase was meticulous and exhaustive. For Jacinta, 77 sessions were held with 27 testimonies, while Francisco's process included 63 sessions with 25 testimonies. Witnesses included family members, neighbors, and people who had known the little shepherds, all confirming the extraordinary spiritual maturity and heroic virtues of these young visionaries. A crucial moment occurred on May 13, 1989, when Pope John Paul II decreed the heroic virtues of Francisco and Jacinta. This recognition declared them venerable, a significant step on the road to sainthood. The papal decree highlighted how these children had lived the Christian virtues heroically, despite their young age. The next important step took place in 1999, when the Church officially recognized a miracle attributed to the intercession of the siblings. It was the inexplicable cure of Maria Emilia Santos, a Portuguese woman who had been healed of permanent paralysis after invoking the little shepherds. This miracle paved the way for their beatification, which occurred on May 13, 2000, in Fátima. The beatification, presided over by Pope John Paul II, was a historic moment for the Universal Church. The Polish Pope, who had a special devotion to Our Lady of Fátima, presented Francisco and Jacinta as two candles that God lit to illuminate humanity in its dark and troubled hours. The ceremony, which included the presence of their cousin, Sister Lucia, marked a milestone in the history of Fátima and in the recognition of child sanctity in the Church. Chapter 14. The Youngest Saints. On May 13, 2017, exactly 100 years after the first apparition of Our Lady in Fátima, Pope Francis canonized Francisco and Jacinta Marto during an emotional ceremony at the sanctuary of Fátima. This historic event made them the youngest non-martyr saints in the history of the Catholic Church, marking a turning point in the recognition of child sanctity. The canonization was the result of a new miracle attributed to the intercession of the little shepherds, the inexplicable cure of Lucas, a 5-year-old Brazilian boy. The child had fallen from a height of 6.5 meters, suffering a severe brain injury that left him in a coma. The prayers of his family and the Carmelite sisters of Campo Mourão, invoking the intercession of Francisco and Jacinta, resulted in his complete recovery, a phenomenon that could not be explained by medical science. During the canonization ceremony, Pope Francis highlighted how Our Lady had been the teacher who led the little shepherds to a heroic holiness. He emphasized that the canonization was not only a recognition of their personal virtues, but also a confirmation of the timeless relevance of the Fátima message and the capacity of children to respond radically to God's call. The sanctity of Francisco and Jacinta possesses unique characteristics that make it especially significant for our times. Their example demonstrates that age is no barrier to holiness, that children are capable of understanding and living deep spiritual realities, and that simplicity and a pure heart are privileged paths to encounter God. Their spirituality, centered on reparation and love for sinners, offers a model of holiness particularly relevant to today's world. The liturgical feast of Saints Francisco and Jacinta was established on February 20th, the day of Jacinta's death. This day has become a special celebration not only for Portugal and Fátima's devotees, but for the entire universal church, which sees in these little saints a living testimony of how God's love can transform even the simplest souls into extraordinary instruments of His grace. Chapter 15. Prayer to Saints. Francisco and Jacinta. Saints Francisco and Jacinta, little shepherds of Fátima, who beheld the beauty of Our Lady's face, help us to be like you, pure of heart and attentive to the needs of our brothers and sisters. May your simple yet love-filled lives be our inspiration on the path to holiness. Francisco, you who spent long hours consoling hidden Jesus in the tabernacle, teach us the value of silence and contemplation. Help us discover, as you did, the importance of consoling the heart of Jesus through prayer and sacrifice. May we learn from you to seek moments of solitude with God, finding there the strength for our daily lives. Jacinta, little martyr of love, who offered all your sufferings for the conversion of sinners and in reparation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, teach us to love as you loved. May your concern for the salvation of souls and your love for the Holy Father be an example for us on our Christian journey. Little shepherds who lived the Fátima message so intensely help us to understand the importance of praying the Rosary and maintaining devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. May your example spur us on to become instruments of peace and love in a world in need of God. Intercede for us so that, like you, we may know how to say yes to God's plans in our lives. Beloved Francisco and Jacinta, who now rejoice in the presence of Jesus and Mary in heaven, pray for all our needs, especially for suffering children, for families, for the sick, and for the conversion of sinners. May your testimony of love and self-sacrifice continue to illuminate the path of the Church, and may your lives always be a beacon of hope for all those who seek God. Amen.